Symmetry, harmony, currently, oh, simply, really need, you with me, oh, enjoy, energy, with me, oh, and we'll just make a play till it, oh. Welcome, YouTube, to another episode of the Introspection Hub. Today, we're going to be addressing introspecting meaning and how to attain it through the lens of Jesus' life. We know we're going to be releasing this during the time of the Jewish Passover. Today, when we're recording this, it's the Passover day, and it's one of the days where Jesus is leading to the ultimate resurrection, where he rises on April the 21st, if I'm not mistaken. Um, I've been curious with how to practicalize my meaning in life. How do I find my purpose? How do I come to a place of understanding where do I want to go in my life? And I know it's a question that a lot of my peers, a lot of our generation are struggling with. We look for it in our peers. We try to imitate each other's lives. And it's not really a practical way of living. It's not a way of moving forward if you want to be imitating another. So we're going to be introspecting what meaning is. We're going to be looking at Jesus's life and how we can attain meaning through that iconic example. And we'll see if we can uh, get anything from the biblical canon in terms of understanding how do we live in our own lives in today's current society. I'll hand it over to the comrade that I'll be introspecting with today, Comrade Joyous. Please introduce yourself. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the question, what is meaning?
Welcome to the viewers. Welcome to YouTube at large. My name, as mentioned by uh, my comrade Simphiwe, is Joyous. You might know me from the first episode to the new viewers. Yeah, my name is Joyous, and I guess I haven't made my religious stance apparent in previous videos. But I don't think it's important for this video because we'll be introspecting on meaning and how Jesus provides a way to attain meaning in one's life. So, yeah, I'm of the opinion that the way Jesus lived his life, particularly the whole philosophy and concept of self-sacrifice, is a very is a very is a very appealing, that's the word I'm looking for, is a very appealing way to live and conduct your life in order to find this meaning. So yeah, that's all from my side. I'll hand it over back to Cynthia.
Thank you for that, comrade. I agree with you that it is, as much as it is appealing, it's also very what polarizing, because who in their right minds wants to sacrifice their lives for someone else? So that led me to the question of, if I want meaning in my life, if I want to have a fulfilling life, right, do I need to be sacrificing something of my current self? Is sacrifice a requirement for all human beings if we ought to find this place of meaning and fulfillment in our own lives? I'm curious whether you think that's a key factor in humanity, sacrifice.
Yeah, diving straight into it. I feel like it's a very it's very key because in a world particularly where um particularly philosophies and schools of thought that focus on and revolve around the self, Jesus comes along and says you must empty yourself and pour into the cup of others, into yourself and serve others. It's a concept of servanthood, and it has this redemptive. Jesus provides a redemptive quality to um, that suffering that we have in our lives through being a servant and serving others. And I feel like that's very powerful because if you check majority of our lives, revolve and or should revolve around self-sacrifice, right? As a parent, you understand that once you birth a child into this world, it's no longer about you. As soon as it becomes about you, you are compromising the child and you're compromising the well-being and compromising the development of the child. In the workplace, it's not about you. There's a job that needs to be done. It's not about you. You have to put your ego to the side, yourself to the side to fulfill a job. But once we start to investigate the more philosophical aspects of it, the concept of self-sacrifice is very, very, very polarizing, as you say, because you find it that it appears in many philosophies. Some philosophies that even reject religion. I would say philosophies like Stoicism. Stoicism is founded, it's built fundamentally on self-sacrifice to say, rid yourself of, detach yourself from circumstance and detach yourself from, what's the word I'm looking for? Detach yourself from emotions, detach yourself from uh, things that compromise you being, um, what do I say, living a meaningful life. And it's apparent in many philosophies. Even Dostoevsky mentions this. So I feel like it's a wonderful blueprint. This thing of self-sacrifice. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more, comrade. Um, for the sake of making this conversation a more conducive one to our audience, because there's a tendency for us to be overly formal, and that tends to push away the people, the very people we ought to address. So I want to personalize it. I want to give more context to why exactly we're speaking about this. I have been struggling with practicalizing this philosophical knowledge that you've just given, that I understand that I ought to be giving away things, I ought to be sacrificing to have this fulfillment, this meaning in my life. I understand that I should be orienting my life somewhat in the same direction that Jesus did, as he is the way, as the scriptures say. I understand that by theory I do, but how do I now apply it to my course that I'm studying? How do I apply it to a way where I can understand, okay, this is what I want to study, even to begin with? And I think I was sharing this with the comrades earlier on, that we live in a society that we monetize literally everything, down to your very hobby. So much so that you don't have anything that you enjoy without the prospect of how can I make money out of it. So all of these problems, all of these things, they occurred to me, not just to myself, but to the people around me, my peers too, that damn, this is a problem that we're faced with. And if we don't introspect on it, we'll never find a way to get out of it and to liberate ourselves from it. So I'll give my thoughts on what I've come up with so that we can address this issue. I've been reading Matthew lately, so from first Matthew to Matthew now, and noticing what Jesus, how he structures his life, so to say. And what you notice is, if he's not talking with the crowds or teaching his disciples, then he's spending time alone. He's in the mountain. And that's something I think we've lost touch with ourselves. Jesus going to the mountain, it's a symbolic act of meditating. That's him in his time meditating and thoroughly understanding who he is as himself. One could say it's him getting divine inspiration, drawing divine inspiration in order to be able to carry out these teachings and these miracles that he does. So that's something I've realized we struggle with. We don't, it's really difficult in our generation to sit with ourselves. We have social media distracting us, we have people distracting us, we have our studies distracting us. There's all these economic factors that we need to be aware of. So I'm curious, Comrade, this is a personal question. how do you meditate? How do you conceptualize meditation? How can, let's say, I want to now meditate. Do you have any tips or suggestions in how you do it? Do you maybe struggle with it? I'm curious, Comrade.
Um, on meditation, wow. For me personally, meditation, when you talk on meditation, as you said, it's getting in touch with yourself. It's looking inward. And when you look inward, when you look inward, what a concept. You find, and when you look inward, you find yourself. I don't know how to say this, but meditation for me is, like I say, when you look inward, you find yourself, right? When you look inward, you find yourself. You get to know yourself. And for me personally, that ties into the whole thing of purpose and the things that you, the things that draw you closer to God. Because when you look inward, you find God, you find yourself. Same thing is what I'm basically saying. And there are things that are so I don't even know how to explain it. You know my thoughts on this. Things like music, things like music. Music has such a quality that's so unexplainable that it feels like music is one of the things that draw us closer to God, to ourselves. So when you say meditation, and for me, I define it as looking inward. For me, when I'm listening to music, and I enter that state of transcending, and I feel like I'm no longer um, bound by my senses in a way. I feel something like it's 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 indescribable. For me, that's meditation. That's how I meditate. That's how I conceptualize meditation. And I know that for some people, they say, music, because their idea of music is Playboy Carti screaming, wow, 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 for 3 minutes straight. But for me, like music, that's why I feel like we shouldn't play with things like music because there are certain things. I'm sure for other people it's different. For me, it's music. For other people, it's different. But there are certain things that because we when we think of meditation, we think of the monks hands together, sitting down, closing their eyes, and taking a deep breath. But for me, when I'm listening to music, that's one of the moments where I feel closest to God, closest to myself, and that's for me meditation. And I feel that it's not even about finding that, bro. It's like those things, that's who you are. That's finding yourself. That's why I say when you look inward, not when you look outward, not when you go to a guru book and they say when you meditate, you must open this. For me, that's how I conceptualize meditation. I'm not sure if that's applicable, but it's all for me. It's all about demystifying such concepts because when you think of meditation, you think of it in such a formal way, like, dog, when you meditate, mele keep on your knees, and there are certain postures that, like the Bible, for example, promotes on your knees, looking upward to God. It's a posture but that posture is not a physical posture. It's representative of the posture that you take when you're on your knees. You are you are you are recognizing that it it's no longer about the physical, man. It's no longer about the physical. You are giving yourself to this higher being yourself, and that's a posture that you adopt. And I feel like you find that in many things. Some people, they walk in nature and they start to be in this place whereby they don't feel in touch with Mhlaba, the world, and they start to evoke certain senses. That's how I conceptualize meditation. Yeah. So that's how I would, I say, encourage or tell the viewers to find that thing. It's not a thing though. Like it's saying it is a thing. It's an experience. It's an experience. That's meditating. You know. So yeah, I'm curious to find out what your way of meditating is, Comrade.
Definitely, Comrade. I'd love to give props to how you articulated that. You said meditating is looking inward, and by doing so, you transcend your current moment. because you're not bound by your senses through that experience. And like you said, it's a very nuanced area because for you that could be music, for me that could be art, for someone else that could be walking in nature. So I love that you pointed out that people need to look inwards to find exactly what it is that they can experience that transcendental moment within themselves. So you asked me, how do I define meditation? And I wrote a piece once actually about prayer. How do you go about praying? And in that piece, as I made a similarity, a comparison between prayer and thought. So, how I see prayer, I see it as secularized thought. What does that mean? That means that what people that are non religious consider to be thinking and thought, that is very similar to what religious people consider as praying. When you pray, what are you doing? You're introspecting. It's a nice way of putting it. But it's not individual prospect. It's not an individual prospect. You're not introspecting only your inner self, but it's as though you're introspecting your spirit man too. You're introspecting the metaphysical aspect of yourself while you're introspecting the physical aspect of yourself. So I hear the Sims, you talking about introspecting as a physical thing, but how does that apply to me physically? And now I want to answer your question. What do I mean by meditation? You mentioned that some people have adopted the posture of you need to be on your knees, and that's one of the ways to get to a point of introspecting. I think what you were pointing towards inadvertently was there is a trigger to get to a point of meditation. And for you, that could be music, the notes, how it sounds to you, how it makes you feel, all of that. That is a trigger that puts you in that space of introspecting, meditating, praying. And for myself, I have a lot of these triggers. Sometimes it's art, sometimes it's music, sometimes it's talking with people. Like right now, as you're talking, I consider this to be a meditating experience actually, because I'm digging deep for the next thing I want to say. And I'm listening to what you're saying and finding what I want to say through that. So when conversations become genuine like that, that is a form of meditation for me. When you are triggered by something that, when you're triggered by something that goes deeper into yourself, how do I put this? I want to define it in a concrete manner. I think the best way to do that is to say, whatever triggers your inner man, that is meditation. Once your inner man is triggered, once you've, as you've said, experienced that loss of self, yeah, I think I'm still struggling to put this into a definite form, but I see your hand is raised, so I'll give it over to you.
Yeah, bro, like I couldn't agree more. You spoke on this word trigger, like this word trigger, and it's such a interesting word, bro, because it speaks to the fact that the whole concept of looking inward, because as humans, we are inclined to face the external world as it is. We attempt to interact with the external world as it is, and we seem to not know that the external world is purely as a result and is indicative of something that is wrong or right, or something is going on with the inner man. And it's such a an interesting concept, because we can go away from the good side of it, of saying which music brings me to God. We can take it to something like, um if I see let's say someone I hold dear to me, suffering, if I see them suffering, if I see someone, I don't know, stabbing my sister, that triggers something. But we tend to look at that triggering and we want to interact on, and and of course, this is a disclaimer. I'm not saying when your sister is being stabbed, you must start to meditate. No, no, no. I'm saying, what I'm saying is just an example to say that when you see your loved one, for example, being stabbed, the reason why you feel some type of way is because it's reflective of your inner man. And what do we mean by inner man? Your inner man um, has your inner man, or it's indicative of the fact that you love your sister, which is a crucial part of your inner man. This concept of love. So it triggers something, and it shows that, and it's a very important concept to say that when we interact with the external world, you can only suffer if your inner man views that external circumstance as suffering. That's how it is. You, uh, like suffering to me as suffering to me is not the same. It's not the same, and it's a very beautiful concept. It's triggered. It triggers these things. I think what I would say to the viewers, or what I feel strongly about. I feel so strongly about this concept to say that when you are faced with external factors, you don't you do not rush to interact with the external first. That starts in. It's like the whole Jesus and the cross. When Jesus is on the cross, he's not looking at the wounds. He's saying, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? He's looking inward. He comes to a point whereby he's at a point whereby he's so in touch with the inner man, the concept of the inner man, looking inward first before looking at the pain. It's not Jesus wasn't crying about the physical pain. That's what always shocks me. He didn't say, "Oh, oh, this thing is painful." Now he says, "Father, Father, why have you forsaken me?" And that's such a powerful concept, and I think it ties into the whole um title of the video to say Jesus and me. It's like looking inward when you're faced with these external circumstances. The first place you should look for is inward, because when you look inward is where you find God, it's where you find yourself. Now I'll give it back to you, Comrade. But this word trigger is such a beautiful word, bro. That's a beauty.
Now, thank you for that, comrade. The thing you opened with first, I wrote the sentence down. It was the external world's perception is as a result of the inner man's turmoils. That's just paraphrasing what you were saying, but that caught my attention. That the external world, how we see the things around us, those are as a result of the state of your inner man. So if your inner man is in turmoil, that ultimately means how you perceive the world around you. It's going to be in a state of destruction and chaos too, because you haven't addressed where this perception is coming from. And that led me to this question of okay, so meaning seems to be a thing of the concept of meaning that I'm speaking about. It seems to be a thing of rectifying or ensuring that that inner man is oriented appropriately. So once that inner man is oriented appropriately, then I can start to find where am I heading in this life. So considering that, going back to how we attain meaning through the lens of Jesus Christ, how he oriented his life. And I mentioned as I was opening that he is the iconic figure of this whole process of orienting the inner man appropriately. As you said, even though he was facing chaos and pain and suffering around him, his inner man was oriented to the Most High. He was asking God why he had forsaken him. So let's practicalize that. Let's bring that back to earth. I'm now struggling with, let me think about something I'm struggling with to make it more practical for the viewers. Okay, I'm struggling with asking for help, right? So this is something that a lot of our peers, not a lot, but we relate with this. There are people that are very eager to help others, but when it comes to a point of asking for help, then it becomes a problem in that regard because they're being considerate of maybe that guy's going through a problem, so let me rather not bother him. Now, Jesus was a figure that had an abundance in helping people, right? And he could help whoever asked him appropriately. That whoever he could tell that this person is very eagerly asking for help. And he always seemed to have a resource that allowed him to operate in this giving. I want to question the inner man. How does one orient the inner man? We've now brought meditation as a thing that it's a trigger to bring you to that space of transcending your current moment so that your perception is not rooted in the current situation around you. But now I want to be able to ask for help, right? Now I'm in a situation that needs me to act physically. How do I practicalize that process of meditation and then go about applying that in my life? I'm wondering if you're hearing my question. If you are, I'm curious on your answer, Comrade.
Nah, knowing you, I know exactly where this conversation is going. Yeah, I was gonna say now we're talking. But yeah, of course, now it begs the question, as you said, um, Jesus represents this figure where he's always the one who helps. He's never helped until you realize that his help is from the Most High. It's a help that it's a help that's eternal. It's a help that it doesn't end. And you can almost take it to you can almost strip it down to a mathematical sense. It's like his source his source is abundant, and he's able to give abundant help or abundant um or abundant, yeah, you know what I'm saying. So I know it begs that question, and for the folk who's not religious, it obviously begs that question to say, who's your source? It only comes from a place whereby you have a source that is abundant, because it's not a coincidence that there's a direct correlation. The fact that Jesus, his source, the way he got his help from, was abundant. It was an abundant, ever present. When Jesus was faced with turmoil, he looks to the Most High, orients himself to the Most High, that he's always able to overcome that. And yeah, now it's all about who's that source. And I feel like you find that, and it goes back to the thing of meaning. What's meaning? And I feel like how does one find that outside of, let's say, God Himself? Let's say God Himself being the ultimate provider, and that's where I personally, my philosophy is, you find God. When you look inward, you find God, you find yourself, because you are eternal. Like I don't know how to concept, I don't know how to put this in words, but you are eternal. You have you for the rest of your life, like in the literal sense, even in the sense where atheists say there's no afterlife. You only have yourself for the rest of your life, like literal. And if you want to take it to the theological or philosophical space, you literally only have you. So that is your source of, that is your divine inspiration, if you will. When you look inward, that's where you receive divine inspiration. That's where you receive this abundant source of help, for lack of a better word. I'm sure you understand what I'm saying. You receive this abundant source of help when you look inward, because when you look inward, you find yourself, and you strip yourself of your ego. When you strip yourself of your ego, and you find yourself in the purest sense. And that's a hard place to get to, because yeah, we are human. We're human, and it's hard to get to that place. We look at monks being we always look at monks being the epitome of that because they've rid themselves so much of their ego. They're so in touch with they're so spiritual. Like people are very spiritual. You can tell people are spiritual, even forgetting monks. Like people are very spiritual. You can tell they it's like they've killed their ego completely. I know we think of ego death in terms of being a bad thing, but ego death can also be a good thing when you completely kill your ego and you are your soul and spirit um, clean and pure. And yeah, I feel like that's the point whereby you reach that place whereby you have an abundant source. Yeah, but I see you raise your hand, me and you disagree. Let's go, bro. Let's go.
No, comrade, it's not a conversation between the two of us if we don't disagree. At some point, we always disagree. You mentioned that you have you for the rest of your life. And at surface level, I agree with you that you have your body for the rest of your life. But in a philosophical sense, what is you? Who are you? Because you today and you tomorrow, in fact, you in this moment and you in the next moment is very different. You could argue that you is the possession of whims. With every moment you're possessed with, okay, I want to do this. My bodily function tells me that I need to drink water. Then I become possessed with that action of me needing to drink water. But can I then define who you is if it's changing in every moment? Like, can I truly find myself if I'm changing in every moment? How do I attain that transcendental you that I can find that is true to every moment of my life?
I feel like you answered the question within the question because you mentioned a very important point that we are constantly transcending. Me is not to say me 2 minutes from now, but I feel that that which allows you to be able to transcend. Okay, okay. I'm trying to verbalize this. That which that ability of yours to be able to transcend, that's you. Because how are we then human? How are we then gods if we are unable to transcend? That's our God nature, that's our godliness in a sense that this process, as I said, of stripping your ego, of killing your ego, is not a one-time process where you close your eyes for one time and you stab your ego and it dies and you're chill. Nah, it's a constant battle. It's a constant process of trying to kill your ego, trying to get to a point whereby you are so in touch with the spirit man. And I feel that that's you, that part which either allows your ego to be allows your ego to grow to a point whereby it is the dominant factor, or that part of you which tries to kill that ego. That's you. That part of you that tries to constantly transcend. That part of you that allows you to want to transcend. Because transcendence, I think when the word in and of itself, it implies uh, a very forward forward trajectory. Like when we think of transcendence, we think of a forward track, but it can also go backwards, bro. Like you can I don't know if this is the correct terminology, but you can transcend backwards. Like there's a point whereby there are some people that become more and more ego driven, and that's transcending you, but you are transcending backwards. There's some people who are so like they are not in touch. You know those people, you can tell that they are not in touch with the spirit man, and that's transcending towards being a a bodily figure, flesh, transcending to being purely flesh. Although you never become purely flesh and you never become purely spirit, or unless you approach it from a theological standpoint, whereby in theology you literally your flesh literally dies and you go to heaven and you are literally purely spirit. But I'm saying like in the sense of a life, you can never be purely flesh and you can never be purely spirit. There's this constant tension. And that tension to be one or the other, that's you. That's you. The person who comes to that point of it's not a conscious decision. I wouldn't I don't know if you can call it a conscious decision, but I would say it's a process and that constant tension between you trying to kill your ego, you letting your ego go, neglecting it, that's you. Because it's there, it's always there for all of us. There's no one person who is born unless you adopt philosophical standpoints whereby you believe that there are such things as NPCs, people who just exist. But from a from a from a standpoint of we all have souls and we are all spirits. I always make this disclaimer when I say spirits. I'm not I don't refer to it in the theological sense whereby or the traditional sense whereby people think that spirit is like this umoya or something. I don't know. My definition of spirit is you, as vague as that may sound, but you are your spirit. You are your spirit. Yeah. So I feel like to answer your question to say who is this you, it's this tension, bro. It's this tension, this constant tension, and it's there, and it and it and it goes into it's like it's always there. You can't avoid it. It's always there. That's you. That's you. The literally said because that always exists. That's why I say you only have you for the rest of your life because that's always there. It never goes away. It's always there. So that's why I say only have you for the rest of your life because you can never be true pure spirit or pure ego. Let me not say flesh anymore. Pure ego. That's why I feel like ego is the more correct term. You can never be pure ego, pure spirit. It's always this constant tension between. We see that Jesus was the epitome of that. He epitomized that. Jesus being God Himself, but He also faced this constant tension of ego and being the spirit man. So I feel that even when we talk about the fall of Lucifer, Lucifer himself, it's a battle of ego and it's this constant battle. So that's when I say you always have you only have you for the rest of your life. That's the biggest battle that you have. That's you. That's you. That's me. That's us. That's all of us. Yeah.
You're cooking, comrade. I have to open it that you're cooking. At a point in your argument, you mentioned something I found contradictory to what you said earlier on. You said you can transcend backwards. And your opening argument was something like the fact that you're constantly transcending, that's your God nature. And we know the God nature to be constantly transcending. So I saw transcending backwards as a regression, not a transcendence. And I found it contradictory at a point, but then you went on to cook that tension between you regressing and transcending in the middle of the two is the constant. So it's as if these concepts are all in equilibrium and they're all what creates you. This whole system, this whole tension, not only the transcending part, but also the part that regresses. It's also the one that's your figure. And then at the end, you mentioned Lucifer. And I coincided that point of Jesus as man and Jesus as God, and then Lucifer as ego and Lucifer as the top G of the angels up there. So I saw that this is a question that I want to ask. The question of what happens when one of these figures in this system, what happens if this equilibrium breaks? Let's say now the Luciferian aspect of your humanity the part of malevolence in you, that's what becomes the driving force. Or what happens if the spiritual aspect of you, the part that's oriented towards ultimate good, the Most High, becomes the driving force in you? What happens if one of these forces break out of equilibrium? That's a question I want to ask.
I would say I don't know. And, I'm not even gonna like. From perhaps you can provide an answer to that. I feel like you're more equipped to that. I feel like you have a larger toolbox because you are more theological. You have a larger toolbox. But personally, for me, I don't. I can't answer that question because what does it mean to be pure spirit? What does it mean to be pure ego? I don't know what that means. So what does that mean? For me, being human, like in terms of now as I am now, it's that constant tension between ego and spirit. So I feel like that's where you could argue that not being that's where you could argue that you not being theological fails. That's why we tend to people rely on theology because when you have that figure, not even the man in the sky, man, I'm not talking about the man in the sky, God, but when you have that figure of who's pure spirit, who's pure spirit, it's easier to answer that question. But for me personally, when that figure is not present, I find it hard to answer that question because I don't know what that means. When I ask you what does it mean to be pure spirit, you would say the Most High. I assume. I don't know what it means to be pure spirit or pure ego. But yeah, I'll just bring it back to you, bro. I feel like you could help me answer that question.
Let me try to tackle it. Fair, I appreciate your honesty and uh, realizing that it's a difficult thing to answer without that entity to back you up in the philosophical aspect. So let me think. I wrote down here Lucifer and then you and then God. That is how I conceptualized what you were saying. And then I split up Lucifer between ego and spirit because you also made this distinction between flesh and man. And then you referenced flesh to being similar to ego in what you were for the sake of your argument. So let me secularize this question. What happens if you're driven more by ego than by community? What happens if that nature that we spoke about when we were opening the episode, the nature of sacrifice and how imperative that is in our lives? What happens if that becomes a driving force, ego versus sacrifice? I'm going to bring it back to the theological aspect in order to answer that question because the latter question is more practical for our audience. So, this is essentially one of the narratives of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation that you have a multitude of natures within you. Man isn't just all good. Man is also what is the absence of good, which is conceptualized as evil. So evil is the absence of good. And man being dual in that nature, in that sense, means, as you said, that there's a constant tension between the two. What the biblical narrative incentivizes is that we ought to become more godlike, not more the latter, because in that godlike aspect, we find that we're able to create as our God did. We are able to bring life into that which is in ornament, the things that aren't alive. And going back to meaning and fulfilling everything, if that is your goal, if that is your question for life, then you should be orienting yourself in that perspective if you want to be transcending your current what your current immovable state, the state of being oppressed by your current self. If you want to transcend that place, then you should be orienting yourself with the latter, the most high, the God, the spirit man, the entity that is calling for Ubuntu. And if you want the opposite, if you want the opposite, which is now the ego self, then what you'll be doing is you'll be satiating yourself consecutively. But what the biblical narrative implies, or what it says essentially, is that that route is not advisable because that route is not sustainable. You can satisfy yourself now, right? Let's say there's a bunch of chocolates for today, and then I want to eat them all today because I want to satisfy this ego self of mine. Tomorrow I won't have any chocolates, and the next day I won't have any chocolates. Whereas if I was sacrificing the ultimate satiation for today, then that would mean tomorrow I still have a bit of chocolates, the next day I still have a bit of chocolates. And the whole narrative, biblical narrative, claims that if you do that, other than doing the other, which is satiating yourself now completely in the moment for you, then you'll have meaning. And that is the question of today, that you'll find fulfillment in the things you do. Look at the story of Abraham. I know we're speaking largely on Jesus and his sacrifice, but there is a similarity between Abraham sacrificing Isaac, or being called to sacrifice his son Isaac, as there is in the way God sacrificed his son Jesus. So when Abraham sacrifices Isaac, he's not really called to um he's not called with a reason of why he's doing it, but he's faced with that dilemma which we all face as humans. Do I defeat this ego self of mine that tells me this is my son for the higher self, which is sacrificing, or do I not? So, which self do I listen to? There's a tension there, and he's forced to choose a path. Do I transcend, or do I regress into the ego self? And he ultimately chooses the transcendence route, which is the one that God mentions. Because you have chosen this route, this will be a blessing for you, for yourself, for the future generations. And a lot of the times, people that are non-theological refer to that whole story as, that's such a vile God to call you to sacrifice your son. But that's not the point of the story. The point is, in life, you'll be faced with this dilemma. Do I satisfy my ego, or do I satisfy my future self? And that requires sacrifice. And already what the incentive is, what the implication of the story is, the biblical implication is you can satisfy yourself and keep your son, but you can also do the latter, sacrifice your son, and then you'll be satiated for now, forever, for your future generations as well. So it largely boils down to the answer you find. What am I introspecting for? I want to have meaning in my life. And if that's what you want, then you are called to sacrifice. I notice you raise your hand, Comrade. I'll give it over to you. But to tie it all in, the question I gave to you, which you gave back to me, was, what was it again? It was something along the lines of, what happens if we tend more towards the other than we do? Like, what happens if I become more ego than I become more spirit? And basically, the biblical implication is that if you become more spirit, then you will have a meaningful life, because even your creations will be as a fulfillment and as a blessing to yourself. But if you tend towards the ego side, then the it's a matter of seeking satiation for the rest of your life. That's what you see in Lucifer. He's not content with himself. He wants the utter destruction. And as you mentioned, you can transcend towards wanting destruction. You can transcend to a place of going backwards. And that's the state which Lucifer is characterized to be in. So, yeah, it really just boils down to what do you want in your life. I'll give it over to you, Comrade.
Yeah, I feel like you tried it um you tried it beautifully because we can also Jesus was the ultimate epitome of that. Like because we're talking about Jesus, he was the ultimate epitome in words like let your will be done, not mine, not my will, let your will be done. He orients himself to pure spirit. He orients himself to this thing that is represent pure spirit. And I feel like as someone who is, I wouldn't say I'm not theological, but as someone who's not as theologically inclined, I feel like it also ties to that. Perhaps to some people in the viewers, some people in the viewers, some of the viewers also feel like that because I feel like part of this conversation we're having, when I came into it, it's all about demystifying. We started meditation. Now we're on this concept of ego and spirit and self-sacrifice. And part of what inspired me to even be part of this conversation is to demystify these concepts. Because when you think of spirit, it's such a we have this wrong idea. For me, it's so wrong. Like it's so wrong what we've been told. Because you can tie it back to the whole thing of Abraham. And the example you made, I feel like is very powerful because he was presented with the ultimate decision. He was presented with it's one of the first books canon in the Bible. He's represented with the ultimate decision. Who serves who? Does the ego serve the spirit? Or does the spirit serve the ego? And he ultimately chose the spirit because he oriented himself to pure spirituality, which is God himself in the theological sense. And I feel like it if you want to tie it into real life perspective, it's such a powerful thing because we can refer to being in the creative space, for example. Both me and you both are in the creative space. You 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 mentioned something earlier. You said how it's troubling you this concept of monetization, this monetization and art, and that's a tension between the ego and the spirit. If you think it's the ultimate epitome of that tension between the ego and the spirit. And I feel like what you said ties in beautifully to what I don't want to say the solution, but what I would say is the the thing that um, ties it all in is that it's not about completely killing the ego because as I said, I don't know what it means to be pure spirit. So I don't know what it means to not have an ego. What does that mean to not have an ego? So it's for me, someone like me, it's not about killing the ego, but it's about the ego being subservient to the spirit. And and what does that mean in the context of monetizing your art? It means that yes, you could monetize your art, but the pure aspect of your art, the thing that even makes you an artist in the first place, which connects you to God. That's why you're an artist, because art pulls you inward. And when you go inward, you find God. That thing must not be compromised. You cannot compromise that. You cannot come to a point whereby you say, when you are making a piece, you are saying, let me make the piece that will sell the most. Once you come to that point, it's like, nah, that's the point whereby the ego is taking over now, and it's this the spirit man is subservient because if you check it out, it's so beautiful because it's not like the spirit man is dying. You are basically saying the ego is the master and the spirit is the slave. So the ego is saying, now let's. It's basically like it's so like when I'm thinking about it, it's so funny. It's basically like the ego is saying, okay, I want the thing that's gonna make the most money. Spirit, cook something there, but it must be the one that makes the most money. It's basically that. It's basically that. It's basically that because when you are making art, you whether you like it or not, as you said, for example, if it's that thing for you, when you are making art, whether you like it or not, you are in touch with your spirit man. That's your spirit man. But in this context, the ego came first. The ego is the one that said, no, 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 no. The most important thing here is what will make the most money. So what will make the most money? Spirit, cook something for me. This will make the most money. Cook this for me. And that's where it becomes an issue. That's where it becomes a problem in the wider sense. This concept of self-sacrifice, stripping your ego and let your ego being subservient to your spirit, not the other way around. And it's so powerful. Like it's so powerful in the creative space. You find that people, you find it's always apparent. It's always apparent. History doesn't lie. The people who give themselves are the one who echo throughout history, not the people who want to, who give into their ego, but they give themselves. Those are the ones that are remembered throughout history. Those are the ones that make the most impact, which is why I say, I told you this, artists never die. If you're an artist, you never die. In the pure sense where your spirit is the master to your ego. You never die. You never die, regardless of whether you didn't get recognition when you were alive, regardless of whether no one, you didn't get money, you died broke. But it also ties into the whole concept of someone who's not theological like me, eternity. You don't die. That's eternity, in my perspective. I'm sure you're gonna elaborate on another perspective on eternity, but in my perspective, that's eternity. You live forever when it's like that. You Because you are ultimately serving something that's bigger than yourself. You're not serving yourself. You're not serving yourself. You're serving something bigger than yourself, and it's apparent in all spaces, corporate spaces. When you're part of a company, and I understand that that's not as philosophical as the examples we're making. It's very nuanced because you could argue that the only reason why I'm nice to my boss is because hey, I want that paycheck. I want that paycheck. But it's an example. It's an example. I'm only using it as an example, not in the practical sense for the people who want to debate me. Not in the practical sense. I'm using it as an example to say that you understand that when you're in a company, the company is bigger than you. You are not bigger than the company. It's bigger than you. And you do things in such a way that benefit the company ultimately, because the company is going to be there when you're gone. So your ego cannot be the master to your spirit. And I feel like that's beautiful, man. You see, when Jesus died, Jesus didn't die. He echoed it to history. He's eternal. He is eternal. As soon as his eyes closed, because he made the ultimate sacrifice, and that's meaning, bro. That's where you find meaning. Yeah. When you make that, when you understand that it's all more than you. It's not about you, bro. It- it's not about you. You could always reference if you want to talk about this thing of purpose. To say people are born with a purpose. I once read a quote, bro. This quote is so powerful. It says it's by Miles Monroe. He says, "Success in what you were never asked to do is the ultimate example of a wasted life." Bro, I was like, nah, that's insane, bro. That's insane, bro. Success in what you were never asked to do is a wasted life. Yo, and I thought to myself, wow, wow, that was mind blowing. I think I read that when I was like 15. I heard that when I was like 15, and that blew my mind. And it's so true. Like when I think about it, it's so true, bro. It is so true. If imagine if imagine if Michael Jackson, I'm gonna use Michael Jackson because people are gonna debate me. Say Michael Jackson wasn't that all that. Who can I use? Who can I use? Let me use someone like who like represented like pure spirituality, like gave themselves to the art, didn't care about. Obviously, obviously, I'll preface this. It's not saying that you must not monetize. I'm not saying completely kill the ego. As I said, I don't know what it means to not have an ego. What does it mean to not have an ego? The ego is always there, but it's about the spirit being the master to the ego, not the other way around. That's what I'm saying. So yeah, we'll talk about some of the greatest musicians. Um, who can I say? Yeah, let's just say the greatest musicians.
I know you wanted to say D'Angelo, comrade. You can go ahead.
Guilty as charged, guilty as charged, guilty as charged. Nah, facts, facts. Because also, if you want to go that Diageo Valley literally did that. Diageo was on the cusp of being like a Hollywood superstar. Hollywood super, like he was on the cusp. He was there. Then he disappeared for 15 years. Disappeared for 15 years. And for whatever reason, but you can he did not want that. He did not. He just wanted to make good music. He just wanted to make good music. So he actually that is a good example. But yeah, it's like it's all about giving yourself because when you give yourself, like it's in the definition. When you give yourself, you live forever. You live forever because that's you. You are giving yourself. You're not giving. You're not letting yourself be subservient to your ego. And that's yeah. That yes, yeah. I've spoken a lot. I'll give it back to you, Comrade. Give it back to you.
You cooked, comrade. You cooked. And I can't lie, I'd be doing this episode an injustice to add any more to that other than my elaborations. I think I agree very much with what you've said and how you tied in. I noticed we've been doing this subconsciously. We've been putting the spirit man above the ego. And it seems so instinctive to us that that is how it is. Like, when have you ever thought, is my flesh higher than my spirit man? And even the biblical incentive, the biblical narrative, that's what it claims. It says, as you mentioned in how Jesus teaches to meditate, how to pray, he says, "Let your will be done, not my will. Let your will be done on heaven as it is on earth." So there's this hierarchy where, as you're saying, there's the one that must be on the subservient side and the one that is the controlling side. Like, it's absurd to tell the person or tell the entity that's creating to be the one that is a slave, because who's the master here? So I agree very much with you, and I love that code. I think that code could be a wonderful concluding point for our audience, that success in what you were never asked to do is a wasted life. That's a very deep piece to introspect on. I know I want it to be a culture for this channel to leave the audience with something to introspect on. And I think that code in itself is a very much deep and what it calls you to introspect. Like, what do I understand by success? Is success something other people define for me? And if it is, how am I wasting my life trying to fulfill other people's wants for me? Like, there's a lot of introspecting to do on that. Other than that, comrade, this is a good point to end the episode. I really appreciated the conversation. I think we've done justice to the life of Jesus as the iconic figure of meditation, self-sacrifice, and ultimately understanding how do we attain this meaning in our own lives. That it's important. The sacrificial aspect of life is very important, because in that sacrificial aspect, you're orienting yourself to a higher means of living, that spiritual entity, as you mentioned. And I am definitely going out of this conversation with a better way of approaching how do I attain and sustain my meaning for life. I understand now that I need to be giving into something that is higher than my current self. I need to be relinquishing the ego aspect of myself for something that is higher than who I am, if I am to find fulfillment in this life. And I'm very appreciative for this conversation. I think this is what introspecting is all about. This is our message. This is our mission, to bring about insight in these aspects. So thank you for the comrade. Thank you for the episode, comrade. I'd love to thank the viewers, however many you will get. And please support us. We're doing this for you at the end of the day, as much as we're doing it for ourselves. Like, share, and subscribe, and definitely comment down below what your thoughts are. Thank you.
Yeah, I I, I echo Simphiwe's sentiments there. So yeah, it's all about introspecting. Yeah, it's like it was what I wanted to say about the whole Michael Jackson thing. You can't imagine Michael Jackson as the greatest salesman of all time. Michael Jackson could have been the greatest salesman of all time. All time. He wouldn't be Michael Jackson. He wouldn't be Michael Jackson. He could be the greatest CEO of all time. He wouldn't be Michael Jackson. It calls you to looking inward. I, I would think I'll close by echoing Martin Luther King's sentiments. Martin Luther King said, if if it falls your life to be a street sweeper, if it falls your life to be a street sweeper, be the greatest street sweeper the earth has ever seen. If it falls your life to be a janitor, be the world's greatest janitor. As long as you are living within your purpose, and what is purpose, as we've said, is that point whereby you find yourself, you find God. And yeah, like, share, comment, subscribe. Yeah, thanks for too. This is just the beginning, man. We're gonna have like a community. It's gonna be beautiful. Like, just give us time. It's gonna be beautiful, man. Yeah, thanks, bro.
Nah, shout out, shout out. I'd love to give my own quote. This is from a comrade I was on a podcast with. He said, "Man can't find himself outside of God." So I'd love to give the audience another piece of introspecting on. Otherwise, yeah, thank you very much. We must have our own shout out. We're going to make our own shout out later on. This is us, the introspection group, signing out from Comrade Joyous and Comrade Simphiwe. Always, always.
Peace.